In the desert of southern Peru, there is a hummingbird the size of a football field. It has been there for 1500 years. And the people who carved it could never have seen its shape, not once, not from anywhere they could stand. There is a spider longer than a bus, a monkey with a spiraling tail, a whale, a condor with a 30-meter wingspan, and hundreds of dead straight lines that run for miles across open desert without ever curving. This is the Nazca Desert, and for more than 1,000 years, a people worked this ground into pictures too large for any of them to ever fully see. Why would anyone spend generations drawing something they could never look at? That question has no settled answer. Only theories, and a desert that has kept its secret for 2,000 years. The Nazca lived here on the arid southern coast of Peru, between the Andes and the Pacific, from roughly 200 years before Christ to 700 years after. Their world was one of the driest places on Earth, a coastal desert where it rains perhaps 20 minutes a year, squeezed between snow-fed rivers that gave them just enough water to survive. The Pacific current offshore, cold and fish-rich, pushed moisture out to sea instead of over the land, locking this stretch of coast into permanent drought even as the ocean beside it teemed with life. And it is exactly that dryness that saved their work. Almost no rain, almost no wind at ground level, and a hard mineral crust that barely changes in 1,000 years. The Nazca did not paint these lines, and they did not build them up. They made them by taking something away. The desert floor here is covered in a thin layer of reddish-brown stones, darkened over thousands of years by oxidation, what geologists call desert varnish. Beneath that dark crust lies pale yellowish clay and gypsum. Clear away the dark stones along a line, pile them at the edges, and the ground beneath glows almost white in the sun. That is the entire technique. No cutting tools of iron or bronze needed. No carving. Just patient, exact removal, stone by stone, across kilometers of open ground. Some lines are barely wider than a footpath. Others are broad avenues, 40 meters across, wide enough to march an army down, if anyone here had ever needed to. Altogether, archaeologists have mapped more than 800 straight lines, 300 geometric shapes, and around 70 figures of animals and plants, spread across nearly 450 square kilometers, an area larger than the city of Los Angeles, almost all of it made without a single building ever standing on top of it. A hummingbird, a spider, a monkey with 9 fingers on a curling tail, a condor, a pelican with a beak that stretches for over 100 meters, a tree, a pair of open hands, a killer whale gripping a trophy head in its jaws, figures drawn in a single unbroken line, without ever lifting the tool. From the ground, walking along one of these figures, a person sees only a shallow groove and a low ridge of stones. Nothing more. No shape. No picture. Only from high above, hundreds of meters up, do the lines resolve into a hummingbird, a spider, a monkey. The Nazca had no aircraft. No balloons that we can prove. No drones, obviously. So the question becomes almost unavoidable. Who was this art for if not for the people who made it? For decades the leading answer was the sky itself. In 1968, a Nazca farmer described the drawings as pages of a giant astronomy book laid flat on the ground. American historian Paul Kosok, studying the lines in the 1940s, watched the sun set exactly along one line on the winter solstice and called Nazca the largest astronomy book in the world. His student, a German mathematician named Maria Reiche, spent the rest of her life trying to prove it. She measured thousands of lines by hand, with a tape measure, a ladder, and a broom. For over 4 decades she lived in a small house at the edge of the desert, sweeping lines clear of debris with her own broom to protect them from tire tracks and looters. Reiche mapped alignments to the solstices, to the rising points of certain stars, to the Pleiades. To her, the desert was a giant celestial calendar, marking planting and harvest by starlight. But when later researchers ran the numbers on hundreds of lines against every possible star and solstice, the hit rate looked no better than chance. With enough lines pointing in enough directions, some will always match something in the sky. That does not mean the astronomy theory is dead. Some individual alignments, especially to the December solstice sunrise, are precise enough that they are hard to dismiss as coincidence. But it likely was not the whole answer. A calendar this size, drawn on ground no single viewer could see from above, is an oddly inefficient way to track the stars. A second theory turns the question upside down entirely. What if the lines were never meant to be looked at, by anyone, from anywhere? What if they were meant to be walked? Archaeologists have found that many lines and trapezoids show heavy foot traffic, worn smooth by generations of feet walking their exact length, out and back. over and over. That points toward ritual procession, pilgrims walking the lines as a form of prayer, tracing the shape of a sacred figure with their own bodies instead of their eyes. Some lines lead directly to Kawachi, a vast ceremonial center of earthen platform mounds a short distance away, built not as a city for daily life, but as a place of pilgrimage and festival. It covers more ground than most cities of its era, yet almost no one is thought to have lived there year-round, a gathering place, not a home. Excavations there found the remains of feasts, thousands of broken painted pots, deliberately smashed, offerings left and never reclaimed, evidence of gatherings on a huge scale. And Nazca pottery is covered in the same imagery as the desert itself. Hummingbirds, monkeys, killer whales. The lines on the ground may simply be their sacred art, scaled up to a size only the gods could take in at once. That is the third and most enduring theory. The lines were not for people at all. They were for whoever, or whatever, watched from above. The Nazca worshipped mountain spirits and, above all, water. In a desert this dry, life and death turned entirely on rainfall in the distant Andes and the rivers it fed. Their most spectacular engineering achievement was not on the surface at all. It was underground, the puquios, a network of spiral stone aqueducts that still carry water today. Some puquios still function 2,000 years after they were dug, channeling underground water to the surface without a single pump, and farmers use them to this day. It is telling that a culture capable of that kind of hydraulic precision could plot a perfectly straight line for 8 kilometers across open desert without a single significant error. Which raises the next mystery. How did a people with no aircraft, no hot air balloons proven to exist, and no way to see their own work from above, draw with such precision? The likely answer is far less exotic than it sounds. Small-scale versions of the figures, sketched on the ground first, could be scaled up using stakes, cords, and simple grid geometry. Stretch a cord between two stakes to mark a straight line. Pivot around a central stake with a cord for a perfect arc. Nearly every curve in the figures can be built from these two simple moves. Modern experiments have shown small teams can reproduce a large geoglyph accurately, in days, using nothing but this method and patient counting of paces. So the how, once mysterious, is now reasonably well understood. The why is the part that never quite closes. Look closely at the animals chosen, and a pattern appears. Nearly all of them are creatures tied to water, omens of rain and flood. The hummingbird, a symbol of fertility and rain in Andean belief. The spider, associated by later cultures with rainfall, since certain spiders were thought to predict a coming storm by how they moved. Even the whale and the pelican point straight back to the sea. One shape looks strikingly different from the rest, a humanoid figure on a nearby hillside, wide-eyed, one arm raised, nicknamed by modern visitors the astronaut, though nothing about it is remotely modern. It far more plausibly depicts a shaman, mid-ritual, arm raised in the traditional Andean gesture of prayer for rain, a figure meant to be seen from the surrounding hills, not the sky. Which suggests something important. Not every figure here was built for a bird's-eye view. Some were built to be seen from the hills that ring this desert, natural grandstands for a ritual audience. From certain ridge lines, entire figures and long lines really are visible without ever leaving the ground. No flight required, just the right vantage point and the will to climb it. So perhaps the answer is not one theory but several, layered over centuries. Calendar markers here. Procession paths there. Ritual art for both human and divine eyes, built up generation after generation. What almost all researchers agree on is the underlying anxiety driving it, fear of drought, and a desperate, sustained effort to bargain with the forces that controlled the rain. Around 500 AD, tree ring and lake sediment records show a catastrophic multi-decade drought struck this coast, right as Nazca ceremonial activity appears to intensify sharply. Some archaeologists think the drought pushed the Nazca toward more desperate ritual, more lines, more offerings, more processions, in an escalating attempt to summon water that never fully returned. There is a darker layer to this story, too. Excavated burial pits near Kawachi have yielded dozens of deliberately severed and modified human heads, what archaeologists call trophy heads, each pierced through the forehead and strung on cord as though meant to be carried or displayed. Isotope analysis shows some belong to the Nazca's own communities, not captured enemies, suggesting a ritual practice bound up with fertility, ancestor veneration, and the desperate hope for rain. It is easy, from a modern chair, to read all this as strange or grim. It was neither, to them. It was survival, expressed the only way a rainless people knew how. The drought did not stop the Nazca. Not immediately. But by around 750 AD, their distinctive pottery, their ceremonial centers, and their line-making all fade from the record. Other Andean cultures rose in their place, but no one who came after ever resumed carving figures at this scale into the desert floor. The tradition simply ended. And then, for well over 1,000 years, almost no one noticed the lines were even there. Ground level hid them completely. They were simply part of the desert. It was commercial aircraft, in the 1920s and 30s, flying mail and passengers over the Peruvian coast, that first reported strange straight tracks and shapes cut into the desert below. At first, some assumed they were simply old irrigation canals or roads. It took years, and Paul Kosok's ground surveys, to recognize animal and plant shapes among the geometry. By the time Maria Reiche took up the work full-time, in the 1940s, looters, treasure hunters, and careless vehicles had already damaged dozens of lines beyond repair. She petitioned the Peruvian government for decades, largely as an unpaid, unofficial guardian, until fencing, ranger patrols, and eventually a viewing tower were finally put in place. In 1994, UNESCO declared the Nazca Lines a World Heritage Site, citing them as one of the great enigmas of archaeology, a landscape shaped by hands that never saw their own work whole. Reiche did not live to see much of that recognition unfold. She died in 1998, buried, fittingly, within sight of the desert she had spent her life defending. Even now, the site is fragile. In 2014, a Greenpeace publicity stunt walked directly onto the hummingbird geoglyph, leaving footprints that may last centuries in ground this dry. In 2018, a truck driver ignored barriers and drove across 3 separate geoglyphs, scarring lines that took a culture generations to lay down and about 90 seconds to damage. Even wind and dust from nearby roads and farms slowly erode edges the desert kept sharp for 2,000 years, a reminder that this record survived by luck as much as by design. In recent years, researchers using drones and AI-assisted image analysis have found dozens of previously unknown figures, smaller, fainter, easy to miss from a plane, impossible to miss from directly overhead, some barely 2 meters across, invisible to a century of ground surveys on foot. A 2019 to 2020 survey using an AI model trained on known figures found more than 100 new geoglyphs in under a year, work that once took human eyes' entire careers. Every new figure adds a data point, and complicates the picture further. Some new finds are humanoid. Some are simple llamas, everyday animals, not mythic ones, suggesting more mundane purposes too. That mix, sacred figures beside plain domestic ones, is itself a clue. This may never have been one single message. It may be 2,000 years of a culture talking to its gods in whatever way felt urgent that season. So who was the art for? The stars, tracking a calendar the desert needed to survive. The gods of rain, watching from wherever gods watch from. And the Nazca themselves, walking their own prayers into the ground. Perhaps the most honest answer is that the lines were never meant to be solved by us at all. They were a conversation between a people and their sky, and we are reading only half of it. What is certain is the scale of the devotion. 2,000 years of labor, spent on pictures its own makers could never step back far enough to admire. No civilization before or since has drawn quite like this, art built for an audience its artists would never meet, on a canvas so large that only leaving the ground could ever reveal it whole. The desert that hid them for 1,000 years is the same desert that has kept them safe, dry, still, almost untouched, holding a message that was never really written for us. And somewhere above that same ground, a hummingbird 1,500 years old is still frozen mid-flight, wings spread across a football field of stone, waiting for a viewer who was never meant to be human.